Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Judges Part 2 as we continue our survey of Old Testament literature and theology. A outline of Judges, I've already given you this, but this is by way of review. We started off with a prologue in two parts, just getting us started in two different accounts, two different stories. Joshua is said to have died in both of those accounts, so they're parallel. Next, we saw a very short Othniel narrative. There's raiders from Mesopotamia that come in. We have the Ehud narrative. Remember the fellow who was bound in his right arm, right hand, and he delivers them from Eglon, the oppressor from Moab to the east of the Jordan. Then there was the Deborah slash Barak narrative, and we have the story there of the fight against that city to the north that had come down with Sisera, and Deborah uh, calls them to lead the people. Barak does it, but a woman, not Deborah, Jael, slays the enemy of God's people with a blow to the head. Great story there. The enemy had been the city of Hatzor. Next, we have the Gideon story, and we saw that story. Gideon's 300. Next, we see again a woman slaying the enemy of God's people with a blow to the head, but this time the enemy is closer to home. It's Abimelech, the son of Gideon. We have another social outcast story in the person of Jephthah. He's a social outcast for a different reason. Again, there's an enemy to the east of the Jordan. This time it's Ammon. Uh, Othniel had been a very short narrative. Samson's a very long one. Chapters 13 through 16, the He-Man with the she weakness, fighting against the Philistines. And finally, we come to what we're going to look at this time, and it's going to be the epilogue in two parts, but it's a bit more involved, so I have to take some time, and it's going to set up the future stories of the rest of the historical book. So we really need to spend some time with that. We start off in chapter 17, verse 6. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. And that's going to become the theme of this section, because that's going to be a problem. You say, well, no kings. Isn't that wonderful? Well, in this case, it's not going to be wonderful. It's going to be problematic. We start off with a story. This is in chapter 17, and it starts off where there's this young man by the name of Micah. And it actually starts off mid-action where his mother calls him in, and his mother says, by the way, whoever stole my silver, I'm going to put a curse on them. And Micah says, well, gee, that's not a good thing. Mom, look, here's your silver. And apparently he's stolen it. And she responds by giving him back some of that as a gift, and he takes some of that silver, and he makes his own idols, and then a shrine to put them in. And if you didn't know any better, if you were just a Canaanite living in the land, you'd say, oh, isn't that sweet? Sort of bad the way it started. But if you're an Israelite, then you're saying, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be making idols and a shrine. There's already a place to worship the Lord, Yahweh, and you're not supposed to be making any graven images. So this story has started off really bad, with Micah looking a lot like the Canaanites that had lived in the land before him. Now, the scene changes next down to Bethlehem. Micah's from the tribe of Ephraim, so he's living somewhere in that area of the tribe of Ephraim. But now the scene changes to the little tiny town of Bethlehem to the south. And there's a Levite from Bethlehem who's rather unhappy with being a Levite. There's no upward mobility in that. And so he decides to leave Bethlehem and go looking for another job. And he makes his way up to where Micah lives. And Micah sees him and they meet. And Micah says, How would you like a job? Instead of being a Levite down in Bethlehem, you can be upgraded to a priest. Now, remember, all priests are Levites, but not all Levites could be priests. You could only be a priest if you were a descendant, a son of Aaron. And this Levite is not. He's just a Levite. He's not a priest. But Micah says, well, I'll make you a priest. You can be our family priest. And we have our own idols here and your own shrine. And you can, we're going to plant you up and set you up as being a family priest. And Levi says, I'll take the job. I feel the call of God. I'm going to go up to this newer calling. Now, God's not mentioned in the story, let me just say. Um, and so this is not a good story. And now the scene changes a second time, and this time it's the tribe of Dan. And they're, remember the tribe of Dan with Samson had been from the tribe of Dan, and he was always getting into it with the Philistines. And they're getting tired of these Philistine neighbors. And since they can't move the neighbors, they decide to move themselves, and they go looking for another tribal inheritance. The tribe of Dan says, we don't like our inheritance. We don't like the part that God gave us. So we're going to leave. And they send, I guess, some spies. Remember how there were spies that were sent out into the land in the days of Moses and again in the days of Joshua. Well, here we're in the days of the judges, and they take off and they're looking around, and they come eventually way up in the north part of the country of the Canaanites. They find a place way up there that nobody has ever gotten to because it's surrounded by mountains and it's hard to get to, and it's almost out of the land. And they find this place, and they come back and they tell their fellow people in the tribe of Dan, we found a new location. And so we're going to leave our inheritance here, and we're going to go way up north to that new location. It's north of the Sea of Galilee. And they're on their way, tracing the same steps that the spies had taken, and they come to Micah and his shrine. And they say, oh, look at that. There's some idols there. We're always in the lookout for idols and gods and looking for newer things. And they go and they take the idols. And the Levite sees them taking the idols and says, wait a minute, those aren't your idols. What are you doing there? And they say to the Levite, what are you doing here? You're a Levite. Well, I've been upgraded. I have a better job. I'm a priest now. And they say, well, how would you like to be a priest instead of for a family? How would you like to be a priest for an entire tribe? That would be a, a promotion. And the priest says, well, I like being promoted. So, okay, I'll go with you. And so the idols and the priests go with the tribe of Dan. And Micah, he comes on the scene and he sees them taking his idols and taking his priests. And he says, what's that about? Those are my idols. And that's my priest. What are you doing? And they say, you better step out of the way or we're going to kill you. Now, these are all Israelites, different tribes, yes, but they're all Israelites. And so Micah, he really doesn't have a choice. He can either be killed, murdered, or else he can just stand back and let it happen. And that's what he has to do. And the tribe of Dan, no, they go way up to the north, and there's a city there that was living in peace. It had been planted there by some just outsiders, some people, not Israelites, called Laish. And they go in and they attack the city and they kill everybody there. And they rename it Dan after the name of the tribe. But now Dan will be a city way up there in the north. And that city is going to continue to be there for the rest of the Old Testament. We're going to see how it's going to play a part. And that city there will be the northernmost boundary of all of Israel. If you go to Dan, and I've been to Dan, you go to Dan and you just go a little bit further north, you've left Israel. You've gone to some other, Lebanon or whatever the country is at that time in the world. But that will be the northern boundary of Israel. And the refrain comes back again. Now it came about in those days when there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. So that first story, Levite from Bethlehem becomes a priest of the people of Dan, and how the people of Dan relocate. And did you notice how that um, Micah's little movement and that the movement of that priest was a microcosm for the entire tribe of Dan that are sort of doing the same thing? And that brings us to the next story. The next story is going to be of a concubine from Bethlehem who, but before we're done, is going to be murdered in the town of Gibeah and will spark a war against the tribe of Benjamin. So let's look at that next story. We start off again with the hill country of Ephraim, just where the first story had started. But in this case, there is a man who has a concubine, and she's from Bethlehem. And now you say, what's a concubine? A concubine is like a wife, but does not come with a dowry. So, if the divorce happens or if there's a death in the family, she doesn't have financial aid to fall back onto. And in this case, she's unhappy. We're not told the reason, but she's unhappy with her husband, and she leaves her husband and goes back to daddy in Bethlehem. And after a while, her husband comes looking for her, and he comes to Bethlehem as well. And he meets up with his father-in-law, and apparently the conversation goes very well. And they stay together for a couple of days, and they're eating and they're drinking, and it looks like the breach, whatever it was, is going to be healed. And so he says, "It's getting time for me to go back home." And his father-in-law says, "Well, why don't you stay another day?" "Okay, I'll stay another day." And they have another meal, and everything's good. And the next morning, he's getting ready to go, and his father-in-law says, "Why don't you just stay, have a nice breakfast, buffet?" Yeah, and okay, well, we do that. But I really do need to get going. And so finally, the man and his servant and the concubine all pack up, and now they're going to take off, but they got a late start. And from Bethlehem, notice there's a city to the north of Bethlehem. It's called Jebus in this story, but its other name that we've already seen is Jerusalem. But remember, Jerusalem is not a Israelite city at this time. It had been captured and then rebuilt, and but it's Canaanites living there. And so they're heading to the north, and it's starting to get late. The sun's headed down, and the servant of the man says, "Whatever you do, don't stop in Jebus. That's just a dangerous place." And so they bypass Jebus because it's all those nasty old Canaanites there, and you don't know what's going to happen there. And they keep going, and it's really getting late now, and they get to the town of Gibeah. Now, notice there's another town of Gibeon that we've already talked about. Those are not the same places. Those are two different places. So you have Gibeon to the west-northwest, but this is Gibeah, and it is a town in the tribe of Benjamin. So they get to Gibeah, and they get to the town, and they decide. They come into the town, and nobody really greets them or anything like that. And so they figure out, okay, we need to maybe set up camp in the town square. We'll just spend the night here, and then when morning comes, we'll be able to continue on our way up to the hill country of Ephraim. And they're setting up camp in the middle of the town, and this older man comes in. He's also from Ephraim, but he's been staying in Gibeah, and he's got a place to stay in Gibeah. And he comes up and he says, "Hey, what are you doing? I recognize maybe from your accent, you're not from these parts." "Oh yeah, we're headed back to our hill country of Ephraim." "Well, you don't want to stay here. Not in this. I mean, it's too dark to go on, but you don't want to stay out in the city square." You get the hint. He doesn't say it this way, but it's sort of dangerous, like the wrong side of the tracks or something. So he says, "Why don't you come into my house instead?" And so they come into his house. They accept his hospitality. And that night, while they are eating and drinking and just having sort of a nice time in the man's house, the men of the city come up to the door, and the door has been secured because apparently at this time in the age of the judges, you keep your doors locked. Now that's not always the truth. Remember, there'd been times where Abraham had been living in Canaan, and he didn't have locks on his doors because he had a tent. There's no locks on a tent. And Abraham, it had been okay, but it's no longer okay. Times have changed in Canaan. And the men of the city, these are not Canaanites, these are people from the tribe of Benjamin. But they come to the door and they say, "Open the door. We want to take these unwelcome immigrant refugees, visitors, and we're going to rape them, especially the men." And you say, "What on earth is going on? This sounds like Sodom and Gomorrah." But that's what's happening. And so there's this insistence. Um, and what the man does, he takes his wife, his concubine, and they open the door briefly, throw her out. "Here, you take her instead," and slam the door. And the men of the city rape her all night. This is just not a good story. This is awful. And when day comes, they get up, and the men of the city, I guess, have gone back to their homes. The men of the city are called Ben Belial, that is, sons of Belial. That's just a figure of speech, meaning they're not very nice people, sort of ruffians. But they rape the concubine, and they leave her at the front door, and apparently she's been not just raped, but killed by this terrible abuse. And so he gets up and he sees the body of his wife, and he packs up her body on his pack animal with his servant, and they head back to Ephraim. And they get there, and he takes her body and cuts it into 12 pieces. Now, it was already gross, but now it's morbidly gross. He cuts her remains into 12 pieces, an arm, a leg, I'm not sure what the pieces were. And he has them sent out to all 12 tribes of Israel. So if you're from the tribe of Gad, something comes in the mail and you open up and it's a head or a piece of the torso, and the people all throughout Israel are saying, "What on earth is this?" And the answer is the story I've just told you. It's a very graphic portrayal. Here's the evidence of this grisly deed that was done in this town of Benjamin. And the people respond, the tribes respond, the tribal leaders, "We have to punish this city of Gibeah. This cannot be allowed to continue. We must punish all the people in the city." And so they come up, but now they have opposition, not from Gibeah. Gibeah is a little tiny town, from the entire tribe of Benjamin. "You can't do that. That's our town. We take care of our own." But look what they did. "We don't care. We take care of our own. Tribes before hives, tribes before whatever." They're just not going to allow it. And now the other 11 tribes resolve to go to war. They're going to go to war against the tribe of Benjamin. And so the war breaks out, and in the first battle, the tribe of Judah goes up against Benjamin first. I'm not sure why all the tribes didn't go. I guess they're waiting and taking their turn. And 22,000 men of the tribe of Judah are killed, and Benjamin wins the battle. Well, that wasn't good. And so they go a second time. There's a second battle. And this time, again, Benjamin wins. And this time, 18,000 men from the tribes of Israel, they're killed. Heavy casualties. That's a lot of people being killed. And now they go up a third time. And in the third battle, this time Benjamin is defeated, and they suffer heavy casualties. And only 600 men from the entire tribe of Benjamin survive. And they go in, and they take all of the towns of Benjamin, and they take all of the women and children and abscond with them. They're made slaves or wives or whatever. And so the only survivors from Benjamin are 600 men, no women, which means once this generation dies out, you're not going to have another tribe of Benjamin, because you need husbands and wives, or else there's no little Benjamites. And so that's the setting. But now there's the problem. We went down to 11 tribes. Do we really want to do that? However, now, just to add to that mix, of all those Israelites that had gone in and fought these battles, one specific city had not come in and shown themselves, and that's a city on the east side of the Jordan, the city of Jabesh Gilead. Nobody from Jabesh Gilead had participated. And because of that, they're going to be punished as well. But we also have this issue. What about these 600 men? Are we going to allow them to repopulate? And how can they do that with no wives? They can't go get Canaanite wives. First of all, Canaanites are holding on to their wives. And secondly, they would be worshiping like Canaanites. How can we do that? And so they come up with a plan. Actually, it's going to be two different plans. So plan number one is the punishment of Jabesh Gilead, where the Israelites go and put them all to the sword Everyone in the city dies except 400 virgins who are now taken and given in marriage to the men of Benjamin. So there were 600 men of Benjamin, 400 women. So you got 200 men of Benjamin without wives, but you actually have some, you can actually begin to repopulate. Well, what about the other 200 men from Benjamin? We can't give them our own wives because the Israelites had sworn an oath. No one of us will willingly give our daughters to Benjamin. And they can't go back on their oath because it was an oath before God, and you have to keep your oaths. But now they come up with a second plan. And plan number 2 involved a regular, I guess it was an annual celebration down at the site of Shiloh. Shiloh was a place where when Joshua and the Israelites had first come into the land, they had made their camp there, and the tabernacle was still there, and the Ark of the Covenant, and they would gather there upon occasion. And the plan was here's the plan that they come up with. When their daughters are there dancing as part of the yearly celebration, Benjamites are allowed to come in and quote unquote kidnap wives from the daughters of Shiloh who come down to dance at the festival. And so the idea is if you're a maiden and you can't get a husband, then go to Shiloh and don't run very fast, and you'll be kidnapped, you'll be captured, and taken back and become part of the tribe of Dan. And that's considered, we didn't break our oath, we didn't give them, but they came and kidnapped these daughters, and we couldn't do anything about it. So, and you come to the end of the story. In the end of the story, again, you have this refrain. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. And that wasn't a good story. And notice that both of these stories have had the town of Bethlehem in them. You had the Levite from Bethlehem. You had the concubine from Bethlehem. Because in those days, there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. And that wasn't good. The hint is that they need a king. And there's a third story. You say, I thought this was the end of the book of Judges. No, there's a third story in the next book, and that's going to be the story of Ruth and Naomi. And again, it will start and end in Bethlehem, where Ruth is going to have a child, and then that child will have a child, and that's how we get King David. Because in those days, there was no king in Israel, and what we needed, this is the unspoken hint, we need a king. And not just any old king, not just a king, but we need a king from Bethlehem who will turn this around and make it right. And our story, as we're reading this from a New Testament perspective, is to say, yes, we need the king from Bethlehem. And I'm not talking about David, I'm talking about the greater son of David. We need Jesus, the one who was born in Bethlehem. Only he can make it right.